Thanks, Shane. We have time for some questions. Any questions for the speakers? Sorry.
When you're talking about BIM, in my experience, the biggest hurdle to moving forward as a developer with traditional experiences that the operational costs are down to the occupier building. So when you're moving forward, how do you overcome that particular barrier?
I'd go back to what I said. Basically, I was at the Autodesk conference in the autumn, and there was a lady there from a leading exponent of BIM in the United States called Tocci. That's T-O-C-C-I, John Tocci. And basically, they're a main contractor. They do BIM. They do BIM whether the client asks for it or not. They do BIM whether their supply chain want it or not. They just do BIM, full stop. They share, they collaborate, they innovate. They do that stuff. And I think basically, as I said, irrespective of whether your client wants it or not, there would be benefits for you doing BIM yourself, irrespective of whether the rest of your team do it or not. And I think basically, a lot of people are saying, oh, the client doesn't ask for it, therefore we won't do it. Well, it's just a cop-out, really. It's simply, this is the way the industry is going to be. Do you want to be a slow hedgehog? It's up to you. If you want to go out of business in 5 years' time or 2 years' time, fine. Because by that time, you'll be being outgunned by your competitors because they'll be doing it faster, they'll be producing better quality, they'll be doing it with less resources, they'll be making more money. And they'll be able to offer clients predictability and certainty on their projects that are unmatched by people working in the traditional way. As an example, somebody put a slide up this morning, the Leadenhall building in the City of London, something like a £200 million project. Lang O'Rourke used BIM on the tender. They engineered the hell out of that building in a BIM environment. They knocked something like 30 million off the contract price and 3 months off the programme. They blew the opposition out of the water. There's a video available online on YouTube. Just Google something like Lang O'Rourke, Leadenhall building, BIM. It's a 10-minute video. It's absolutely fantastic, and that's 2 years ago. This isn't just about big projects. It's small guys too. I know a guy in Oxford. It's one-man practice. He's used ArchiCAD from the word go. He works on house extensions. Provides fantastic service. So that's my take.
Sorry, John. You're preaching to the converted. I've been pushing this for years. The problem is, how do you convince the client that he's going to go down the route? Because as far as they're concerned, they're only interested in letting the building. The costs after that are down to the tenant. How do you convince them that it's the tenant?
Why do you need to convince the client? If it's the way you work, it's like saying, would you convince the client that they've got to have CAD drawings on their project? Would you convince them that you're supposed to integrate the design? Would you convince them that you're supposed to have subcontractors or whatever you want to do? If it's the way you work, why do you need to convince them? Why do they need to know? As long as they get the result, what's the deal here? If you're trying to make some more money out of it and put your fee up or put your price up for using BIM, then yes, you have got to convince them. But in that case, why do you need to do that? BIM at the very least should be cost neutral. And a lot of the people I work with who've been doing it for several years now, they're actually able to offer cost incentives to clients by using this approach. So does the client need to be involved? If the client's interested in the life cycle benefits of optimizing a solution, great. If they're not, and it's the way you work, why bother convincing them? Just do it.
John, question for John. Just, you mentioned the digital plan of work, John. Could you just maybe elaborate on that a little bit? I mean, for example, has there been a consensus agreed with all the stakeholders in the UK of a generic plan of work?
Yes.
It used to be the RABA.
It's on the
plan.
website.
Yeah. So could you just explain how they got that agreed?
Well, basically, it's one of the work streams that came out of the BizBIM report. And they've been working away for about 18 months. All the major institutes are involved. And basically, they've looked at all the... There's about a dozen or so leading plans of work like RIBA, RCE, ICE, CIC, some of the TfL stuff, and a few other bits and pieces. And they've looked at trying to get an alignment, and they're quite diverse in that some of them do have an overview of the life cycle of project. Other plans of work, actually, they don't consider the operational end at all, so there are significant gaps. So basically, the digital plan of work is an aligned plan of work. It's based around, as I said, the APM and CIC scopes. And it's intended to be an umbrella for everybody else's plan of work. So like the RIBA plan of work is being updated this year, it fits within the overall umbrella now of the digital plan of work.
And is it just for building or for building and civil engineering?
It's everything. So it's any built asset. So that could be a road, it could be a tunnel, it could be a track. It's infrastructure and buildings.
So finally, so the UK government or the public procurers for for buildings and structures or civil engineering projects will mandate that this digital plan is used on all public sector projects?
Yes, yeah, I think they will. Yeah, I think it's still whether it's mandated now is a good point. I'm not sure on that, but certainly because I think there's going to be a period where this begins to settle down. But basically, all the other documentation now is aligned around this. So you've got the employer's information requirements, you've got the COBE stages, it ties everything together, the PAS 1192 process, all the other stuff, it all interlocks. So all that guidance that I listed that's on the website, it's all cohesive and integrated. And I think this is a real groundbreaking moment because we've got an integrated suite of documentation that aligns the whole process and dovetails everybody's input. And it's for any built asset in the built environment. So it covers infrastructure, it covers buildings, it's generic, but you then work within that.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Gentleman there.
I think the easiest way is actually to take a contemporary style approach to it. The problem when you're designing a kind of traditional, something that looks like a traditional house or has a relation to it, then you're having to adopt a certain set of styles, symmetry, door sizes, window opes. But if you break free from that and you start to look at contemporary architecture that has no reference point, then there's nothing to say how big a window has to be. Now I do have clients that come to me and they do want to keep a certain traditional feel about their buildings. And I would say to them there's actually a compromise because it'll end up costing you more in terms of building and in terms of heat loss, because those windows that are at the north, they might be there for planning reasons or to keep it a traditional feel, will lose more energy. And because you're losing more energy, if you want to make a low energy or passive standard building, you're going to have to then compensate for that by putting more insulation elsewhere. So in terms of your question from the planner's point of view, the planners I've approached, they're very open to contemporary design. And I think you have to separate that from modern design, because modern design is something that's related to kind of what happened in the 50s, 60s around, whereas contemporary design is actually looking beyond that, and it's looking at sustainability, it's looking at contemporary living, it's looking at contemporary materials, and it's about making up-to-date styles in architecture that are related to what's available now. Sorry? Right. You know, I've done work in Cork. We just got planning permission in Wexford, Galway, Clare, Tipperary. I usually find that the most important thing is you have to throw out all of the baggage. And that's why contemporary, when you go in with no reference to anything, but you go in, you have to be knowledgeable on sustainability. Passive house is very important. Because passive house, you can put a strong argument and demonstrate it onto why would you put your windows south-facing and why would you have large windows, and also showing how north-facing windows are going to result in more energy loss, which means more CO2 is going to be generated, which, I mean, all planners and all government departments have to be working towards reducing CO2. So if you feed everything, I guess the approach you have to look at is that you have to treat them as almost a child, and you have to bring them along the whole process of why is this the best way of doing it. And I think that you'll find that it's not just luck. When you do it like that, you'll find that you can bring a lot of people around.
Come back to you.
A similar question to John, to the last questioner there. I'd like to know how the UK statutory planning system has prepared itself for the BIM application.
Must admit, I don't really know. I know of some instances where BIM models are being used to help with the planning process. In terms of visualization, looking at the impact of a project, you know, daylighting angles, that sort of stuff. My impression is that the majority of local authorities are very slow on the uptake of the implications of this. There is a working party that's starting looking at the regulatory side, you know, in terms of planning and building regulations, because obviously there's a lot of stuff that can be done in terms of processing planning applications. For instance, I think it goes back 10 years. I think is it Singapore or Malaysia? You can do a planning application online and you get a decision within something like 10 minutes. Because you input the model, it processes it, it spits out the answer, you know, and because in simple terms, it's a sort of compliance thing, isn't it? If you've got some rules set up that govern how you want the planning to work in a particular area, you can. It only sort of flags a red light if something pops up that's sort of outside of that thing. So it's the same with building regs. You can do a lot of compliance checking and set up rule sets to do that. And Solibri is one of the leading packages on that. But in answer to your question, I don't really know, but I know there are some working parties looking at it.
Okay, take the final question.
Sorry, I'll just add to that for a second. In in England, I believe that you can submit a lot of planning applications through PDFs and online.
Yeah.
So that is already a step more than we're used to here. And even in Dublin now, you can submit your planning applications digitally for extensions and small projects online. So, like John says, it's coming, and it's going to be happening.
Yeah, just add one thing. I mean, where we will be is, I think, if you're thinking about sort of smart cities and digital connection, then basically every local authority will have a digital model of its area. It will have every building modelled. So basically, applications will be set in the sense that a designer or a client submits their BIM data set, it's plugged into the local authority model, and it's checked. And that process would be very quick. It doesn't take away the human element, because I would imagine there'd still be a case officer who looks at it and says, well, you know, are the windows the right size or the right colour or whatever, you know. But I think that's where we're going. And again, on the government side, they're already mapping the UK infrastructure on all sorts of levels, all sorts of networks, like knowing where all the pumping stations are across the UK, all the power stations, all sorts of stuff. And this is about managing digital data in the public sector environment, and that work is going on now. So this is all in context. So where we will be is a lot more connected, and it will be digital.
Miles, the houses you've designed so far, have they been timber frame or traditional concrete? And do you have a preference?
Mostly timber frame. I have done concrete block, so I'm familiar with that. My preference, generally speaking, is probably for timber frame, but I usually leave that choice up to the client in the end. The reason I prefer timber frame, first of all, I mean, I spoke in the slides about the flexibility, and I think some of the other presenters talked about the ease of prefabrication, and timber frame is great in that point of view. But ultimately, at the moment, we're all talking about efficiencies and energy efficiencies of buildings, and that's where all the focus is. When we get all of the buildings down to low energy buildings, the next thing we're going to be looking at is the embodied energy in the materials that make up the building. So concrete has a huge amount of embodied energy in making concrete. Timber, on the other hand, is a resource that is hugely available in Ireland, and it's a renewable material, so it's absorbing CO2. You cut it down and you put it into a building. That's CO2 taken out of the atmosphere and locked into a building. So I'm working on timber frame also because I think maybe it's 20 years away, but I think that's keeping ahead of the curve.
And has there been any negative feedbacks from your clients that are living in these houses?
No, but we have to separate out, let's say, generation 1 or generation 0 timber frames is what a lot of people here would be familiar with, of housing estates that were thrown up 10 years ago, 7 years ago, which really they were timber frame structures because the developer wanted to build that housing estate as quick as possible, and so they weren't looking at end comfort in the production of the timber frame. But there's now ways, especially if you look at Germany, ways of making timber frames that exceed any of the downfalls in timber frame in terms of noise transmission. I think that's probably the biggest concern that you're referring to is noise transmission, but good detailing can deal with that without any problem.
Okay, I'd like to thank our speakers for the mid-morning session. We'll break for lunch now, and all groups are back to this room at 2 p.m.